everyone, and welcome to this, my Doctor Who complete DVD collection video. And I've been wanting to do this video for a while now, just not got round to it, but I have now. And what I'm going to do is showcase all my Doctor Who DVDs. I'm not going to do an in-depth series of overview and review of every single story like I did in my previous videos, which I did in individual parts, but I do want to show you them all. So let's get started with my complete Doctor Who DVD collection. So we might as well start at the very beginning with the Lost in Time box set, and this is a great set to pick up. Missing episodes that have not had their own DVD release. Some of the episodes that feature on here are sort of a little bit redundant now, with stories like the Underwater Menace, the Enemy of the World, and the Web of Fear having their own DVD releases now, but there's still some cracking gems on here. But let's start with the very first Doctor Who story, Unearthly Child, and this is a good story actually. I really enjoy this one. Part 1 is definitely the highlight, but actually enjoy this story all the way through. Nice four-parter. And then we have the Daleks, the very first Dalek story, and I've got to say I really love this one. I originally gave it an 8 out of 10, but after rewatching it I probably give it a 9 out of 10 now. I just really like this Dalek story, probably my favourite Dalek story from the Hartnell era. Yeah, I just really like it, and even though it could have done with maybe being 6 rather than 7 parts, but that doesn't really deter the entertainment value for me. Yeah, Daleks, fantastic story. And The Edge of Destruction, a great 2-parter, really good character development in this story, and yeah, it's really good 2-parter, one of my favourites in fact. Then we have the Keys of Marinus, which I think is the brainchild for what become the Key to Time series with Tom Baker, and again I would give this still an 8 out of 10. A really solid story, quite an ambitious story, and I really like the direction it takes with each episode being set in different places. Yeah, Keys of Marinus, really great one that. And then we have the Aztecs, which again is a really good historical, probably my favourite Hartnell historical, and Barbara has a lot to do in this story. Really good one, really enjoyed that. And the Sensitises, episode 1, like on Unearthly Child, is probably the highlight, with the Sensitises being very creepy at the beginning. It tails off into a slightly different direction, where the Sensitises themselves are not as menacing as you expect them to be, but it's a good story. I really enjoyed that. And the Reign of Terror, which I originally gave a 5 out of 10 for. I said it was probably my least favourite Hartnell. I have to change my mind on that one now. I actually think it's a pretty good story. I only give it maybe a 6 out of 10 now, but I still really enjoyed it, and there's some really good elements to this story, and the animation's actually not too bad in this one. Then we come to Planet of Giants, which I think is a lot of fun, and I think being a 3-parter, I think that's perfect length for it. Yeah, I do like Planet of Giants, it has to be said. And then we have the Dalek Invasion of Earth, which is the departure of Susan. And I think this one is maybe a little bit overrated, personally. I do enjoy it. I just think it drags a little bit. I find that this one goes a lot slower than something like the Daleks. The Rescue, which introduces Vicky, is an okay 2-parter, nothing spectacular. It's an average story, little 2-parter there. The Romans is quite a fun little story. Hartnell was very funny in this one. Yeah, that's quite a nice one. And then we have the controversial Web Planet, which I probably would say is my least favourite Hartnell story, watching it now. I'd give it a 4 out of 10. There's some parts of it that are good. There's a good story behind it, but I can't help but laugh at it, so I can't give it lower than a 4. A 4 out of 10, I think, for me is a fair score. Then we have the Space Museum, which is an underrated one. I quite enjoy that, nice concept. And The Chase, which introduces Stephen and is the departure of Ian and Barbara. The first episode or 2 and the last episode are really good, but in between it's just a bit silly. Time Meddler, yeah, that's a really good little story. Really good actually. Another one of my favourite historicals. Incidentally, Time Meddler is the last DVD to feature Vicky, who departs after the Myth Makers. And then we have Dodo introduced. I think she is introduced at the end of the Massacre, which is the story that precedes the arc. But yeah, the arc has a good concept, quite underrated again, actually. Yeah, the monoids are a little bit ridiculous, but I do quite like this one. I like the fact that it has two separate stories, but they kind of interweave together. The Gunfighters, which is quite a fun one. If you don't take it too seriously, it's actually quite enjoyable. And of course, Stephen departs at the end of the Savages, which comes after the Gunfighters. And then we have the War Machines, which introduces Ben and Holly, two of my favourite companions from the 60s. And it also says goodbye to Dodo. But the War Machines is one of my ultimate favourites from the Hartnell era. Really love that one. And then we have probably my favourite William Hartnell story, The 10th Planet. Good animation in this one. One of my favourite Cybermen incarnations, the Mondasian Cybermen. And it's the first regeneration. So it's a great story. Really like The 10th Planet. I'd probably give that one a 10 out of 10. And next we come to the Patrick Troughton era, my favourite Doctor, as you may already know, and we start with not only my favourite Patrick Troughton story, but my favourite Dalek story, and one of my favourite Doctor Who stories of all time. Nothing more really needs to be said about this. Absolutely love Power of the Daleks, and the animation is really great as well. And then after the Highlanders, which comes after Power of the Daleks, which introduces Jamie, we have the Underwater Menace. And I actually quite like this story. I think it's just a shame that the DVD release is so appalling. The 2 episodes that have telesnap reconstructions is just god-awful. But if they had animated this, which they should have done in this day and age, they really should have animated this one. It actually would have been a pretty good story. Having said that, out of the existing DVDs from the Troughton era, Underwater Menace probably is still my least favourite. Then we have the Moonbase, classic stuff here. Absolutely love the Moonbase. And I've got to say that as a pure Cyberman focused story, this is probably my favourite Cyberman story of all time. It's a base under siege, it's amazing, and like Power of the Daleks, the Cybermen are exactly as I expect them to be, as I expect the Daleks to have been when they were in Power of the Daleks. They're just perfect, and these are my favourite type of Cybermen as well. Absolutely love the Moonbase. And now we have the recently released the Macra Terror, all animation, and I said I was going to give a review of this one. It gets a 10 out of 10. Another fantastic base under siege, so creepy, atmospheric, really intense, exciting. Love the story, and I think it's just absolutely wonderful. I love the Macra Terror. It's probably now I would put in my top 5 Troughton stories. Absolutely love it. If you haven't got this one, go and pick it up. It's absolutely fantastic. And after the Faceless Ones, which follows the Macra Terror, is the departure of Polly and Ben. And in the Tomb of the Cybermen, we have Victoria, who appears in Evil of the Daleks, which preceded this story. Tomb of the Cybermen, another great Cyberman story. Not my all-time favourite, as I said, that would go to another one, although the Moonbase is my favourite purely focused Cyberman story, but this one is still fantastic. It still gets a solid 9. Then we have the Ice Warriors, and not a bad story. The animation is pretty good. It does tend to drag a little bit for me rewatching it, but I do still like the Ice Warriors. I like the Ice Warriors as enemies, and yeah, this is a good story. Then we have the new special edition of Enemy of the World, and this is a classic story, and it's great that all the episodes do survive now. It's just maybe not typically my kind of story, although Patrick Troughton is fantastic in displaying Salamander and the Doctor, but it's not one of my all-time favourites from the Troughton era. I give it still a solid 8 out of 10, but there are other stories. I prefer these more sort of horror-based stories, or the sort of base under siege stories to these type of stories, but still a fantastic one. And I personally prefer the Web of Fear for that exact reason, the sort of creepy base under siege. I really do enjoy this one. I probably prefer this one to Enemy of the World personally. Yeah, I give that a 9. So we have the Dominators, and Fury from the Deep saw the departure of Victoria, And in the Wheel in Space, we got introduced to Zoe, and this is the first DVD to feature Zoe. This is the Dominators, and I actually quite like this one. Some people don't. It's kind of a mixed bag. It's kind of a Marmite story, this one. You either love it or hate it, I think. The Mine Robber, yeah, really good one. Good 5-part story. Really enjoyed that one. The Invasion, which is my favourite Cyberman story of all time, but like I said, the Moonbase is my favourite focused Cyberman story, because I think a lot of this story is focused around Device Vaughn, played by Kevin Stoney. Unit appear in this after appearing for the first time in The Web of Fear, but The Invasion is just 8 parts of absolute perfection. The animated episodes are really great, and this is one of my all-time favourite Troughton stories and one of my all-time favourite Doctor Who stories. Fantastic stuff. Robert Holmes' first story here, The Crotons, which is quite fun. Then we have The Seeds of Death, which I think it's tied between this and the Ice Warriors. I can't really separate them. There's elements of each that I prefer the stories, but yeah, I do like Seeds of Death. Again, it suffers from the Ice Warriors in that it sort of drags a little bit, but yeah, Seeds of Death is quite a good one. And then we have the War Games, which is an astonishing achievement right here. 10 parts, but it flies by. We get introduced to the actual Time Lords. The Doctor gives it his all in this one. Jamie and Zoe are superb. There's fantastic characters, great acting, fantastic concept, and I just absolutely adore the War Games. Another one of my all-time favourites. Love the War Games. And now we come to the third Doctor, which is of course the fantastic Jon Pertwee, which introduces the companion Liz Shaw and Unit Return in Spearhead from Space. Fantastic, just absolutely fantastic. Season 7 is my favourite classic Who series. Just love Season 7, such a dark and gritty series. And then we get Doctor Who and the Silurians, one of my all-time favourite Pertwee stories. Love this one, really creepy, atmospheric. The conflict between the Doctor and Unit is really great. I love the Silurians, I really do. And then we have another fantastic story, Ambassadors of Death, really underrated. I think this is starting to get more of an appreciation now, but I think this is a fantastic story, and yeah, a solid 10 out of 10 for all these stories, including this one, The Almighty Inferno. Absolutely magnificent masterpiece. It really is, just 7 parts of absolute perfection. One of my all-time favourite Third Doctor stories, and one of my favourites of all time again. And then we come to Season 9, which introduces Jo Grant, Katie Manning, and the Master, Roger Delgado. The best Master we will probably ever see. Absolutely fantastic Roger Delgado. And this is a great start. Terror of the Autons, really enjoyed that one. Nice sequel to Spearhead from Space. The Mind of Evil, one of my all-time favourites again. I absolutely love this. Straight away gets a 10 out of 10. My favourite Master story, and this has a place in Season 7. It has that real dark, gritty feel about it. Love The Mind of Evil. Claws of Axos, really good again. Quite underrated. And Colony in Space, another one I really enjoy and really underrated. Takes a while for the Master to get involved in the story, but I actually quite like that. It sort of gives it a different dynamic. Really like that one. The Demons, which I do enjoy, but I do feel it's a little bit overrated, but I do enjoy that. Day of the Daleks, not a bad Dalek story. It gets a 7 out of 10. The Curse of Peladon. I actually quite like the Peladon story. Some people don't. But yeah, I quite enjoy this one. And yeah, I give it an 8 out of 10, I'd say. The Sea Devils. Very similar story structure to the Silurians. I prefer Doctor Who and the Silurians to the Sea Devils, though. But still, fantastic story. And it has the Master as well. And the Sea Devils are more menacing, I guess, than the Silurians, which is probably why a lot of people would say they prefer the Sea Devils over Silurians. The Mutants, It's a great story, it's just the execution and the special effects are quite awful in this one, but I don't like to knock the mutants. I think it's quite a good story. Then we have the Time Monster, which is probably my least favourite Pertwee story, but still not a bad one. Still gets probably a 7 out of 10. I just, you know, Tom Tit and all the rest of it, I just didn't like the way it ended, I guess. Three Doctors, well, it features William Hartnell, the first Doctor, Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor, and of course John Pertwee, the third Doctor, and Omega. What more do you want? What more can you say about that? And then we have the slightly strange and surreal Carnival of Monsters. I actually quite like this. It's a bit experimental, but in a good way. And yeah, I quite enjoy that one. So we continue with the third Doctor on the second shelf with Frontier in Space. And this is the last story to feature the Master, sadly, as Roger Delgado passed away tragically. But yeah, Frontier in Space is a really underrated story, just absolutely fantastic. Give that one a 9. And following on from that is Planet of the Daleks, so the two kind of mould into each other, and this is probably my favourite Dalek story from the Pertwee era. And then we have The Green Death, another spectacular story, and this is the end of Joe Grant. She leaves at the end of this story. My favourite companion exit, and another fantastic story from the Third Doctor era. Yeah, very sad to see Joe Grant go, as she was one of my all-time favourite companions. Great story. And then we come to The Time Warrior, which starts off John Pertwee's last season, and it introduces the Centaurans, many people's favourite companion Sarah Jane, and of course we get the mention of the Doctor's home planet Gallifrey. So that is quite a significant story in itself, but the Time Warrior is a great one. And we have another underrated gem, Invasion of the Dinosaurs. Yeah, it's very tatty in terms of special effects, with the monsters and dinosaurs looking quite grim, but it is a pretty good story, actually. If you look past that, it's actually a fantastic story. And then we have the Third Doctor's final Dalek story, Death to the Daleks. A bit like The Chase. It's a little bit silly, but I can look past that because it's actually quite fun. And then we have The Monster of Peladon, which is a really good Peladon story. I actually prefer this one, just because the Ice Warriors in this one are a little bit more menacing. That's what's good about the Curse of Peladon, is that the Ice Warriors aren't actually enemies in that, but you always expect that they're going to turn hostile. But in this one, it's really good because they are quite hostile. But yeah, I think this one is the better of the two, personally. And then we have the Third Doctor's final story, Planet of the Spiders. Kind of encapsulates everything the Third Doctor's about. It's a Earthbound story predominantly, with Unit, and of course the Doctor gets to do some badass stuff in this, including riding a helicopter and a hovercraft. And the ending scene where he regenerates is very somber, but yeah, it's a good story overall. Not one of the absolute best regeneration stories, but still pretty good. And now we come to many people's favourite Doctor, and probably the most iconic Doctor from the classic era, certainly. We have the Fourth Doctor, Tom Baker, in Robot, which again is an Earthbound story featuring Unit, and it's very much a John Pertwee type story, but yeah, Tom Baker gives it his all in this one, and he's actually fantastic in this. Then we have The Ark in Space, one of my favourites from the Tom Baker era. Absolutely love this one. Really claustrophobic, a base under siege story again. And even though the special effects are very iffy, it's a fantastic story, so you can really oversee those faults. The Sontaran Experiment, probably my favourite two-parter, where Tom Baker famously dislocated his shoulder. Yeah, great story. And then we have Genesis of the Daleks, my favourite Davros story, one of my favourite Dalek stories in general. Absolute masterpiece. If you haven't experienced this, you really need to. Absolutely flawless. Revenge of the Cybermen, not one of my favourite Cybermen stories, but I do get some enjoyment out of it. That would still probably get a 7 out of 10. Then we move to season 13, which is most people's favourite season. One of my favourites as well. Terror of the Zygons, and love this one. And it's the last time that Unit appear with the Brigadier for a long time. Then we have Planet of Evil, which I think is really underrated. I really love this story. I give it a 9 out of 10. Maybe that makes it a guilty pleasure, I don't know. But the set design is fantastic. It's a base under siege type story. The Doctor's great in this, very funny as well. And I love it. I don't see this dislike for this story out of the season 13 episodes. This one seems to be the one that gets a bit of a bashing, but I actually love this one. And Pyramids of Mars, which of course I don't need to say anything about this. It is a classic. I find it slightly overrated. I wouldn't say I'd give it a 10 out of 10. I give it a 9 out of 10. But personally, there are other stories I prefer to Pyramids of Mars. But I do agree it is an absolute classic, and Sutekh is fantastic. The Android Invasion, another underrated one. It's either between this and Planet of Evil usually that is kind of the overlooked stories from season 13, but I really do like the concept of this one. Brain of Morbius, essentially a Frankenstein story, really great as well. And my favourite Tom Baker story of all time, The Seeds of Doom, 6 parts, goes by so quick, and the Doctor is really moody in this one, and you really do feel that it's the end of the world in this one. Absolutely flawless for me. I love this story. Yeah, again, this one doesn't seem to get as much appreciation as I would have expected, but then again, it is in amongst a very strong season, well, strong couple of seasons really. Absolutely brilliant. Then we have The Mask of Mandragora, which I actually quite like now. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Beautifully scripted. The ending is a little bit rushed, I believe, but yeah, pretty good one. Then we see Sarah Jane depart, and her departure is great in this story, The Hand of Fear, but overall I think it's an average story. It's okay. And then we get the first and only classic Doctor Who story with no companion. The Deadly Assassin, part 3 is just psychedelic and very strange, but that's kind of what is so unique about this story. And you get to see the Doctor on Gallifrey. Yeah, great story. Then we have the introduction to Leela, one of my favourite female companions again, in The Face of Evil, and this one's underrated. I like this one. The Robots of Death. No question that this is a classic, and I'd agree with that. This gets a 10 out of 10 for me. Love The Robots of Death. And I give a 10 out of 10 to this. The Talons of Weng Chiang, absolute masterpiece. It's a sort of Sherlock Holmes homage type story. I just love this one. It's really, really great. Great set design, great characters, great acting overall from all the cast. The Doctor's really great in this. Great plot, great twists, and yeah, it's simply superb. And that ends the Philip Hinchcliffe era, which started at the beginning with Robot, and then we come to The Horror of Fang Rock, which again is one of my all-time favourite Doctor Who stories. I love this. Very creepy, very atmospheric. Tom Baker is fantastic in this as well. So is Leela. It's a great cast as well. Yeah, love Horror of Fang Rock. One of the last true masterpieces from the Tom Baker era. 10 out of 10 for me. The Invisible Enemy is quite fun. And also the Invisible Enemy introduces companion K9. Image of the Fendal, underrated. I think it's actually quite a good one. I prefer this to say something like The Demons, which I do find slightly overrated, as I've said. The Sunmakers actually is quite a funny one. Again, not many people really talk about this one, but it is quite enjoyable. Underworld, it's bad. It's got some good ideas in there, but not the greatest. And The Invasion of Time, there's a hilarious scene where Santaran is succumbed by a chair. As we know, it's the departure of Leela, sadly, but it's a bit of a slog, that one, but it's not bad. And then we come to the Key to Time series, which introduces Romana Mark 1, and we get the Ribos operation, which is quite good actually. I quite like that one. The Pirate Planet, which is quite bad, but it's quite funny in places at the same time. Stones of Blood, which I think is massively overrated. First half I really love, but second half don't really like the way it goes in terms of direction. Androids of Tara, probably my favourite from the Key to Time era. Really like that. And really like the Power of Kroll as well. I don't know, maybe it's got that Seeds of Doom feel about it with the giant monster, but Yeah, I quite like this one. I don't see why there's so much hate for it. And then we have the Armageddon Factor, which sees the departure of Romana Mark 1. Yeah, I think this one's a bit of a slog, really. Six-parter. It does sort of drag for me quite a bit. It's good, but yeah, it's a bit of a slog, that one. And then we come to Destiny of the Daleks, which is probably my least favourite Dalek story from the classic era. It's average. And the introduction of Romana Mark II. City of Death, which of course is a classic, and I give it probably a 9. It's not one of my all-time favourites, but it is a great story. Creature from the Pit, average. It's quite a funny scene there in this one, which I think a lot of people are aware of. Nightmare of Eden, I think this is actually a really good story. It's a bit iffy in its execution, but still, I quite enjoy it. The Horns of Nymon is kind of a guilty pleasure for me because it is bad, but I can't hate it because this character just makes me laugh by his overacting. It is quite funny. And the unfinished Sharda, which has now been released with animation to complete it in a feature-length almost story. And I love Sharda, and it's such a shame it didn't originally get finished. But now we do have it complete with animation, I guess. So I love this one. I really love Sharda. I give it a 10. And then we come to Tom Baker's last story with the Leisure Hive, which I despise. I hate this story, not even worth mentioning. Meglos, average, although we do see Jacqueline Hill return. And then we start with the E-Space trilogy now, which again I'm not a massive fan of, and it introduces Adric, one of my least favourite companions. Full Circle, average. State of Decay, don't really like that one. And Warrior's Gate, which is just a bit of a complicated mess really. Sees the departure of Romana Mark II as well as K9. Yeah, don't really like that one. But then we do have a good story with the Keeper of Traken, which I do actually quite enjoy. It introduces Nissa, and it also reintroduces the new incarnation of the Master. Yeah, this is definitely a good one. Definitely the best one for me out of the last season with Tom Baker. And then we have the incredibly underwhelming Logopolis, which introduces Tegan. It's a Peter Davison story, essentially, and it involves the Master. And for Tom Baker's last story, after 7 years, I was expecting a hell of a lot more from this story. Considering that I associate Tom Baker's stories with sort of alien or horror-based stories, I was expecting something like that from this. Didn't really get it. And the ending scene, the actual regeneration with the sort of weird sort of snaps of people, enemies and companions saying, "Doctor, Doctor," I just find very underwhelming. Not a suitable end for me for the fourth Doctor. One of the greatest Doctors we've ever had. Yeah, underwhelming finish for him. So now to the third shelf, and we continue now into the Peter Davison era with Castrovalva. Episode 1 is really great, but after that it sort of falls to pieces a little bit. Kind of the curse of the Unearthly Child and the Sensorites there. It's okay. Then we have 4 to Doomsday, which is not bad. It's Peter Davison's first actual recorded story. That's quite good. Kinder, which is pretty good actually. I quite like this one. I think this is a sort of fan favourite. And then we have The Visitation, which is one of my favourites. I just love the direction this story goes. Really enjoyable. And the Fifth Doctor is really good in this one. Then we have the two-parter Black Orchid. Not really a fan of that one. Earthshock, a fantastic Cyberman story with a very dramatic ending. It's also the departure of Adric, and if you've seen Earthshock, you'll know how he departs in this story. Absolutely fantastic, that one. I give that one a 9. Time Flight, also known by me as Time Shite. Don't enjoy that one. The Arc of Infinity, reintroducing Omega, and also Colin Baker appears this one as a Gallifreyan guard. Not great, average. Snake Dance, not as good as Kinder for me. Martin Clunes appears in this one, but it's okay, average. Then we have the Black Guardian trilogy, which I'm not really a fan of. Mordrin Undead introduces Turlo, not a very favourite companion of mine, but the Brigadier appears for the first time since Terror of the Zygons, and for that reason I quite enjoy it, but the story itself is not great. Then we have Terminus, which is the departure of Nyssa, and I don't really like this story at all. I give this one a 3 or even a 2 out of 10. Just really not much about this one I like at all. And Enlightenment, one of the worst Doctor Who stories I have seen, along with The Leisure Hive. It's just rubbish. Don't like that. King's Demons, it's an okay two-parter. 5 Doctors, yeah, brilliant stuff. I'd prefer the 3 Doctors to the 5 Doctors personally, but it's still pretty good. It's great to see Patrick Troughton and John Pertwee. Of course, clips from Shada were introduced to show Tom Baker as part of this story, and it's a pretty good one. Warriors of the Deep, again, rubbish story, really tacky, and it's got the Silurians and the Sea Devils. Should have been so much more than it was. Then we have The Awakening, which is, again, a forgettable two-parter. It's okay. Frontios, really dark story, and I think the 5th Doctor really suits these darker stories. Yeah, really enjoy Frontios. That's a good one. Very, very good one. And then we have Resurrection of the Daleks, which is the departure of Tegan. Yeah, great story. This is a really, really good Dalek story. Probably the best since Genesis. And there's quite a lot of killings in this one. A very mature story for the 5th Doctor. Planet of Fire, which introduces another one of my best female companions. Of course, it introduces Peri, as well as the departure of Turlo, thank goodness. And this story itself, though, it's okay. Nothing spectacular. And the fantastic, brilliant Caves of Androzani, a very, very good regeneration story, probably the best regeneration story for me since the War Games. I give this one probably a 9 out of 10 now. I really love this one, but I wouldn't go so far as to give it a 10 out of 10. Certainly don't understand this greatest Doctor Who story of all time stuff, but it is excellent. And now we come to Colin Baker, the 6th Doctor era, with the Twin Dilemma, which is rubbish. Attack of the Cybermen. Although it's not one of the greatest Cybermen stories ever, I do actually really enjoy this one. Quite violent again. Yeah, really like that one. Then we have Vengeance on Varos, which is probably one of his greatest stories, the 6th Doctor. Introduction of the character Syl, who is fantastic in this. It's got a fantastic cliffhanger. Yeah, Vengeance on Varos is definitely one of my favourites from the 6th Doctor era. Mark of the Rani introduces the Rani as well as the Master Bean in this one. It's not bad, it's okay. Nothing spectacular. The 2 Doctors, probably my favourite Colin Baker story because we have Patrick Troughton, the 2nd Doctor, and there's some Sontarans in this, and I like the location setting for this one. Time Lash, it's very clear that a lot of the budget went into the costume design of this character here, because otherwise it's very tatty looking and it's quite funny in places, so I can't hate on it too much, but it is a bad story. And Revelation of the Daleks, which is quite a good Dalek story, nothing spectacular. And then we come to Colin Baker's final season with The Trial of a Time Lord, starting with parts 1 to 4, The Mysterious Planet, which is pretty a good start actually, quite enjoy that one. Then we have most people's favourites, Mind Warp, which is also sadly the departure of Peri, Syl returns, and of course we got Brian Blessed in this story. It is pretty good. I would say it's on par with The Mysterious Planet. Then we have Terror of the Vervoids, which introduces Mel, who I'm not a massive fan of, but I do quite like this story. This is probably my favourite story actually from The Trial of a Time Lord, although that would probably not be a very popular opinion. Then we have the last part, parts 13 to 14, The Ultimate Foe, which is quite a good twist actually in the story and not a bad ending to the 6th Doctor era. And now we come to the final classic Doctor, Sylvester McCoy, the 7th Doctor, and we kick off with Time in the Rani, which is, again, episode 1 is pretty good, but the rest of it I'm not a fan of really. It's average, a bit like Castrovalva really. Paradise Towers, which I actually quite like. A lot of people, again, won't really like this one, but I think this one's actually quite fun. Delta and the Bannerman. Very bonkers story. Has Ken Dodd appearing in it, of all people. Yeah, it's quite enjoyable to a certain extent. And then we get Dragonfire, which is the introduction to Ace and the departure of Mel. Yeah, not a bad one. Not a bad one. And then we come to Sylvester McCoy's penultimate season with the fantastic Remembrance of the Daleks. One of the best Dalek stories. It's definitely the best story for me since Genesis of the Daleks. I prefer it to Resurrection, and I definitely prefer it to Revelation of the Daleks, and of course definitely prefer it to Destiny of the Daleks. This one is spectacular. Yeah, it's just great. This might actually go up in my estimation. I give it a 9 now, but on rewatching I might even boost it up to a 10. The Happiness Patrol with the Bertie Bassett character, it's okay, nothing memorable. And nothing memorable about the 25th anniversary story, Silver Nemesis. It's okay, it has some ambitious ideas in it, but execution's not great. And then we have The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which really displays some really fantastic creepy elements, and the Doctor is a badass in this one, and it's quite a dark story, really love that one. And now we come to the Seventh Doctor's final season with Battlefield, which has the Brigadier again. Love this story, actually, really great. I give this one an 8 out of 10. This one sort of goes overlooked. Ghostlight, which is actually quite good if you just ignore the fact that there's no explanation of what's going on. Really creepy in this one. And The Curse of Fenric, my favourite 80s story. Everything I love about Doctor Who is in this one. The Doctor's quite dark and sinister. It's a sort of creepy horror-based story. There's aliens. There's great cast, good acting in this one. The Doctor is superb in this, and so is Ace. Absolutely adore The Curse of Fenric. And then we come to the final classic story, Survival. With the exception of a really great scene between the Doctor and the Master, this is quite a good story overall, but I wouldn't say it's a fantastic end to the classic era. And then we finally come to the 8th Doctor, Paul McGann, with the TV movie, which is average. The Master is not very good in this. And then some miscellaneous. We've got A Girl's Best Friend, K9 and Company, featuring Sarah Jane. I haven't watched it. More Than 30 Years in the TARDIS, really great documentary, really good celebration of 30 years of Doctor Who. And then we've got the standard original editions of some of the classic stories like Enemy of the World, Inferno, Carnival of Monsters, The Talons of Wang Chiang, and the original edition of Shada, which is worth keeping a hold of because it does contain all the missing footage, whereas the new release of Shada has cut it down to make it more of a feature-length episode. But yeah, so that is my classic DVD collection dealt with. Let's move down to the 4th and final shelf for the New Who era. And so we come to the 4th and final shelf with the complete Series 1, which has, of course, the 9th Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, as well as introducing Billie Piper as Rose Tyler. Fantastic series, one of the strongest series. I absolutely loved the first series. And then after that, Eccleston only stayed for one series, so we get the 10th Doctor, David Tennant. Yeah, it's a good series. There's some really strong episodes in this one, like Girl in the Fireplace and School Reunion. There's some really strong stories in that one. But unlike Series 1, which is great all the way through, there are some real duds in this one. The Satan Pit two-parter is one of the highlights for me from this series. Then we get the complete third series, which Billie Piper as Rose exits at the end of Series 2. And we get Martha Jones in Series 3. And of course, it reintroduces the new incarnation of the Master. Yeah, stories like Blink are on this one, and Gridlock as well. Some really tremendous stories on Series 3. I prefer Series 3 to 2. And then we have one of my favourite series from the New Who era, Series 4, which introduces Donna Noble. It has a great 3-part finale, but it has some of my all-time favourite episodes in this one, like Midnight and the Silence in the Library 2-parter. Absolutely love Series 4, absolutely fantastic. Only one season beats this. And then we have the complete specials, which again features one of my all-time favourite stories, Waters of Mars. Absolutely spectacular. And then we come to the 11th Doctor and my favourite New Who Doctor. We have Matt Smith with that really nice holographic cover. Yeah, and this introduces Amy and Rory. Absolutely love this series. This is my ultimate series from New Who. This is my favourite. Absolutely love Series 5. The 2-parter, the 2-part finale is absolutely brilliant. The Weeping Angels 2-parter is fantastic. 11th Hour, spectacular. And of course, this has the classic Vincent and the Doctor. Absolutely love Series 5. Brilliant one. Series 6, we get introduced full time to River Song in this series. It has some really strong episodes, but then there's some real absolute dross in this series. This is probably my least favourite series, the complete Series 7. Firstly, because it introduces Clara, and it's the departure of Amy and Rory. But just because this one wasn't as ambitious as Series 5 and 6 with the story arcs that they had. This one didn't really have a story arc as such, but there are some really good stories in here. I do enjoy elements of Series 7. And then we have the 50th anniversary celebration specials with An Adventure in Space and Time, which is like a documentary drama about the first Doctor, of course played by David Bradley, who is fantastic. Then we have the fantastic Day of the Doctor, great 50th anniversary special, and we have John Hurt as the War Doctor. That's a really good one. I give that one a 9 out of 10. And then we have Matt Smith's final story, The Time of the Doctor, which is average, but his departing speech is fantastic. Then we have the very lackluster 12th Doctor's season, starting out with Series 8, which introduces Danny Pink. Clara still remains, and we are introduced to the new incarnation of the Master, which is Missy. It's probably my least favourite season of New Who. And at the end of Series 8 also is the departure of Danny Pink. Yeah, not a massive fan of that series. Then we have Series 9, which is again probably my second least favourite series from the New Who era, and has one of my least favourite stories of all time, Hellbent. And then we have Series 10, which I actually think is a very strong series and has my favourite New Who episode of all time, World Enough in Time, where the Mondasian Cybermen return. Absolutely spectacular, that story. And of course, as Clara departed in the end of Series 9, we get new companions, Nardal and Bill Potts. And Bill Potts is a fantastic companion in particular. Really think she brought a breath of fresh air to the show. And then we have the final 12th Doctor story featuring David Bradley again as the first Doctor, which is Twice Upon a Time, which is average, not very good at all. And then we have some more miscellaneous stuff. We have the complete Season 12 on Blu-ray from the 4th Doctor. Fantastic set that is. And then I have one box set of the Lost TV episodes, which includes The Smugglers, The 10th Planet, Power of the Daleks, The Highlanders, The Underwater Menace, and The Moonbase. So that is the TV episodes on CD, the Lost episodes. And that concludes the New Who era. So thank you for watching this, my complete Doctor Who DVD collection, classic and new era. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my review, and leave your comments and your likes and opinions and everything else, because it's always very appreciated. So this is the end of my complete Doctor Who DVD collection video, and don't forget, like, subscribe, share and comment, and I will see you folks in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.